All right, Gentlemen Badass Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I am Josh Kidney. We've got Mick Doyle as usual.
Hello.
And today we have got Kurt Sorys in the studio with us. Now, Kurt is a retired Omaha police officer, but he was also in charge of training new recruits. And in his tenure, he trained, something like 350 new recruits?
350 went through the academy while I was there, yes.
Okay. So we'll get into a little bit of that pretty quick. But, with all our guests, we kind of like to start out with background, kind of where you came from, what you were like as a kid. If you've got any stories, just to kind of give us an insight into your upbringing. What do you have there?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Omaha. I grew up in the Benson neighborhood, so went to Rose Hill Elementary School where Warren Buffett went. So that's my sole connection to Warren Buffett, being an Omaha guy. Monroe Junior High, and then I graduated from Creighton Prep in 1982.
Okay.
Went to college for about a year and a half before I got hired by the police department. Growing up, I was blessed to have two parents that took really good care of me. My dad liked to hunt and fish and things like that, so we did a lot of that. Canoe trips, hunting, fishing in Minnesota, trips to the mountains and things like that. So didn't get in too much trouble because he was a police officer, and he was well known, so you try to avoid being dragged home by the collar to meet your dad, because that was the day when they believed the police officers when they said your kid's be in trouble.
Crazy. So whereabouts in Benson? I actually had a house over there for a while. Actually, I still do, but
55th and Blondo.
Okay, that's not too far.
It's a country club neighborhood, I think, is what it's considered.
Okay.
If I told you go pick out the house that from the TV show Everybody Loves Raymond that the parents had, you would find my house, because a two-story colonial looked just like that.
Yeah. I'm a big Warren Buffett junkie, and so I did a bunch of reading on him, and turns out when I lived in Benson, the library that I went to all the time was the same library that Buffett went to when he was growing up. So that felt pretty cool about
60th
that.
60th and Northwest Radial, I think, is where that's at.
Where my first gym was.
Yeah, you were over in Benson too.
Well, 51st and Northwest Radial was where we had the first kind of iteration of the gym. And then we moved it up to 61st and Maple, right into Benson.
So that 52nd Northwest Radial was that underpass that everybody was aware of.
The scary underpass.
The scary underpass that smelled like urine all the time.
Yeah.
So you said you went to college for just a little bit and got right into, being a police officer. How did that come about? I mean, your dad was a police officer.
My dad was a police officer. My mom was a teacher. Right.
Okay.
She had, she matured as a police officer's wife, and she wanted to see me do something different. The Creighton Prep side of things was basically, I wanted to go to Benson. That's where all my friends were going, become a bunny up there. But she said, hey, listen, if you go to Creighton Prep, we're going to have to buy you a car to get back and forth. Deal. So that's what took me there. I did well at Creighton Prep. I mean, I was fairly smart back in the day, and at that time, going to Iowa State for engineering was one of the things that people like to do. So that was kind of her vision, and I agreed to it. Went there for a year and absolutely wasted my mom and dad's money. I spent more. I'm not a golfer, but I spent as much time golfing as I did in class there. Did your typical freshman type of routine, and came back home. Went to UNO. Started going through their criminal justice program after that. And applied for the police department just for the experience of doing it, and did well enough that I actually got hired. I was 19 at the time, and I mean, that's crazy. If you think about it back in that day, I didn't think much about it. But
so what year was this when you went into the police academy?
83.
And how big was your class? What was the recruit class size then?
34, 35 people.
Okay. And so did you grow up wanting to be a police officer, or it just kind of had the opportunity presented to you?
You know what? I never thought about it that much. It was just, there was policemen around me as long as I can remember, because my dad came on the police department in 1958, and I was born in 64. So that was just part of my life was that. Yeah. And I was thinking about my own thing, but going to college and doing the studying just didn't appeal to me. Just the way I work, I like short-term problem-solving type of things. That's what police officers are. You're just problem solvers in the short term. And that appealed to me. As time went on, it's like, all right, I like this. This works for me. Where the continued education just was not part of who I was. Okay. Killed my mom, but because she was an educator. But I think she eventually understood.
Yeah. So you get onto the force. You'd kind of grown up with it. So the question is, what surprised you about being on the force? But maybe nothing did.
The fact that they let me on at 19 was part of the big surprise. I mean, and of course, again, you look back on that and you look back at the 19-year-old version of yourself and you think, oh my God, how dumb was I? And why did anybody ever listen to me? All right. You know, of course, at the time, you know, you're young and you're cocky and you don't think too much about it. You're proud of what you think you've accomplished and who you think you are. But I look back on that and, you know, several years later, it's like, oh my gosh, because there was like one other person that came on the job at 19 after I did, and the state law is 21, so I don't know exactly what was happening back there. But I mean,
Wow.
I mean, I received teasing because I couldn't register my own firearm. I had to have my dad come down and do that for me because of my age. And my classmates never, until I retired, never let me forget about that.
Wow.
But the attitudes of some people, a culture, you know, I grew up in a culture that trusted the police and to a certain degree admired the police, but there's a whole other culture out there that they train people and their children to distrust and dislike police officers. And that you see that very quickly, and it's disappointing. And I think it still exists today.
Okay. So Mick and I had kind of a brief conversation on a previous episode about kind of the standards these days for becoming a police officer. Do you have to have a college degree now, or can you?
I don't believe so. I think
Okay. That's thunder for anybody
Yeah,
listening.
we're
We're
in a
having a
thunderstorm.
nice storm here. So
when I came on, you received, I think you did see some college credit points as well as veteran points.
Okay.
And the first one to go were the veterans points.
Okay.
Which is sad. But I still believe basically a GED, a driver's license, and a clean record will get you on the police department.
okay, and 21 unless
And
something
21, yeah,
magical
no,
happens.
it's 21. I
Is
mean,
it-
it's state law, and again,
Okay.
I never looked at the state law back then. I assume it might have been the same, but there's a handful of people that came on at the age of 19 or less than 21.
Okay, and then just kind of fast forwarding a little bit, when did you retire then?
I retired in 2009, so it'll be 10 years coming up here
Okay.
at the end of June.
But you were on the force for 25 years.
I was on 25 and a half.
25 and a
Again,
half.
because of that early age, you could the retirement age was if you had done at least 25 years and were 45 years old, you could
Okay.
retire. Well, when I hit 25 years, I was 44, so I
Okay.
had another half a year before I was eligible to go.
Okay, so obviously, and the culture is even different now from probably when you retired, I imagine. But what type of changes did you see, kind of when it comes to, like, not only the people you dealt with on the streets, but the new recruits, stuff like that? We'll get into the training here
Sure.
a bit. I'm just interested to see, because being a police officer in 1983, I imagine, is a completely different story than being a police officer in 2019.
Sure.
It is. You know, so a little background about that time frame. You know, the court case that Tennessee versus Gardner, which involved police use of force and shooting fleeing felons. You know, back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, and I worked with a lot of people that were on in the 60s and 70s. If you were chasing a stolen car and a 17-year-old kid jumped out of that stolen car and ran down the road, it was legal to shoot at that kid, regardless of what any other circumstances. And then that law started to change. So in 1983, law enforcement was kind of getting into the era of political correctness as far as things go, like our use of our baton. They didn't want anybody using any forward strikes with the baton. Everything had to be backhanded to give the impression that it was more of a defensive type of a maneuver, right? But I worked with a lot of people who were not trained that way, the old school guys, and they did things the old school way. You know, if someone was out of line, they let them know in certain terms. They got them one chance, and if they didn't get them that chance, and then there was a fight. And they taught people a lesson in that regard. And to a great degree, there was a lot of people that actually respected that type of law enforcement. You know, even the people who were the recipient of that behavior kind of understood how it worked. But as time goes on, and obviously there's some things that happened that should have never happened in those days. So there was a reason why those rules changed. But the lack of respect and the more taunting and teasing and everything like that of police officers became more prevalent. Liability concerns and things like that. I can remember a day, Omaha used to have a no pursuit policy, right? They didn't want the liability because in Nebraska, we're a third-party liability state, which means if, for instance, if I'm chasing Mick because he's just committed a robbery and he crashes into you, I'm responsible for all the damages, even though he's the one that caused them. So they started canceling pursuits, and some of the young young thugs in society knew that, they would go out to places like the Ford dealership, steal 5 or 6 T-Birds at a time, and just go rolling them through the projects, knowing that we couldn't chase them. It was an interesting kind of an era there with that lack of respect and stuff like that. So
Wow. Yeah, that would make it difficult.
it was they actually had, there was a kid who was kind of a wannabe commando spy. They would hire him to go out, and he would do the security, he would cut the fence and do all that kind of stuff. And that was back when the car dealerships used to have the little metal key boxes hanging on the outside of the car window,
Yeah,
so
right,
people could
yeah.
get in them. Well, someone found a key to one of those, and it was not uncommon to have 6 or 10 cars at one time taken, a lot of times from Matchley Ford up there on North 72nd Street.
Crazy.
So what age was your dad when your dad was still on the police force
Yes.
when you went in?
Yes.
So what did he think of you becoming a cop?
Oh, I think he liked it. Yeah, he liked. My dad was a Marine, then he became a police officer, and so he was proud of that accomplishment for me. He supported it 100%. I came on in '83. He retired in '98. So we served at the same time, but we never served. I was never served under his command. I mean,
Was that a rule or?
I don't know if it. I don't think so. But it was something that we thought was best.
Would you have been okay, like if the opportunity came to serve with your dad, or would that be a little
Oh,
weird?
absolutely. I would have served with him, but I think from a conflict of interest standpoint, it's just better than that it doesn't happen that way. There are a lot of times I've seen husband and wives serving on the same crew and things like that, and I just think it's a bad idea to have close relationship in that type of an environment, because just the potential for emotional connections to come into play
Sure.
are pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
Crazy. So when did you get into the training aspect then?
So the training aspect, it came. I was promoted to sergeant. I don't know, 1991. About 2003, there was some changes occurring in the training academy, and then they selected a new lieutenant to go to the academy, and that lieutenant was someone that knew me, and she called me in and asked if I'd be willing to take the supervisory spot in the academy, and I did.
Okay. And how long did you do that?
About 6 years. So 2003 until actually I retired out of the training academy in 2009.
Okay.
So Omaha now has its own academy. When you went in, were you still at the time? Didn't everybody go through Grand Island?
No,
or
Omaha had their own academy.
They had
in
it
there,
back then
They're
too?
Back at that time, Omaha, Lincoln, and the State Patrol all ran their own academies under the direction of the State Academy.
So then, if you become an instructor at the academy, are you working the beats of the street at that point? Are you completely? Is that your full-time job as a?
My
training
job was
officer?
full time. But we have Omaha utilizes both. We have adjunct instructors who
Okay.
have jobs outside, but because of their expertise, they will come in and teach certain subject matter, like accident investigation. Right, we have those guys from the accident investigation unit come in and teach, and a lot of other places as well. We look for people that have expertise and physical skills to come in and help coach in that regard as well.
Okay.
So
So when it comes to the training aspect, then, we've kind of talked about differences in culture and individuals. From I don't know, we maybe talked about the '90s, early 2000s to millennials, and you were probably kind of right on the cusp of getting some of those in.
oh yeah.
Did you notice like a marked difference between the types of recruits you got in from when you started towards when you were becoming to retire? Or
There was. So coming in, we would get a lot of military people, and I loved the former military guys because they understood life a little bit. They had life experience, and the harassment or punishment or whatever you want to call it that happens in an academy didn't faze them a bit because they understood what it was about. They had survived much more than that, and they just took it all in stride, and they were able to function well under those conditions. And then we would get people who had led a virtually stress-free life, people that were joining the police department in some degree because it was a good paying job with benefits. And they would come in, and the first time you yelled at them over something trivial, they just didn't know how to handle it. And sometimes we've had every recruit class I knew to have someone on standby because within the first 3 days, somebody would resign because
Really?
it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. Sometimes it was day one. At the end of day one, they wouldn't show up the next day. And that happened. That happened in virtually every recruit class of any size that I had go through there. And I had recruit classes from about mid-30s up to 58 people.
Although I suppose you'd want that to happen.
Yeah.
You'd want those weaker people
There
weeded out.
is, and it's interesting because I mean we used to talk to the city about and say, hey, listen, we got to toughen these guys up before they come in here, because the city has a physical fitness standard, the obstacle course at that time, that really wasn't very strenuous, and so people would pass that course thinking that they were ready to go. And we would bring them in, and like on the second day, we'd be doing simple things like, all right, now do 10 push-ups, get on your back, do some sit-ups, now do some planks and stuff like that. And I can remember one guy that came in that couldn't get the second push-up. So obviously he wasn't well prepared. And then if you come in if you're not physically prepared to handle the type of stuff that goes on, that worries you, and your body, it's mentally demanding just on the physical side of things. And then you throw in the added things that you have to learn, and they just couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
It's too much all at once. Where you get someone that comes in as fit, they can handle stress better because their body is prepared for it. It doesn't affect them nearly as badly.
So when you went through the police academy, how many weeks of training did you have to do?
14.
What's the standard now? Is it
About
still
22.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we had a much shorter academy. The physical demands and stuff like that have changed over time are good for the academies. I mean, they're a lot more detail oriented on the laws, and there's a lot more physical training that's done. Some of the stuff that we didn't have a whole lot of hands-on training back in the day, and the systems have certainly, because if you think some of the older trainers that trained us, is if the guy wants to fight, hit him with the stick. That's the solution to your problem.
Solution,
Well,
yeah.
society started saying, well, let's think of some different ways. So you started getting into the pressure point control tactics stuff, which worked on compliant people, but not very well on people that didn't want to obey what you had to have in mind. And then you get into the different martial arts. The jiu-jitsu is obviously big and things like that. So there's quite a combination of things that are now taught. You've got to, some elements of Krav Maga, some elements of jiu-jitsu, then the punching and kicking, and there are a few elements of the pressure point techniques that are still utilized, but it's the same stuff that you guys know from the martial arts. You kick a guy hard on that common peroneal nerve, and man, it has an impact on him.
Yeah.
So we've talked about kind of in the past how physical standards and just the physicality of our country has completely been reduced. How probably around 50% of high school graduates wouldn't even qualify for the military if there was a draft because they're so out of shape. And so obviously you see that in the police force as well. But on the other hand, then, I've heard, and this is all secondhand, so it could be myth, but, they've taken certain types of punishment or stress out of boot camp. Like supposedly the drill instructors can't strike students anymore, and it might even come down to they can't verbally harass them in certain ways. Now, obviously there's hazing that goes above and beyond, and
Right.
that's just terrible. But there's a reason that you're putting these recruits through stress. Has that, did you notice that had been reduced for
Watered
you?
down?
Is any of that?
No, you see, so the police, the academy, when I came on in '83, the hazing aspect was not there.
Okay.
Right? We'd go out for a run, we'd do push-ups, we'd do sit-ups, we'd do your basic exercise type of stuff, and that was in 1983. In 2003, 20 years later, when I came on in there, that's the same type of stuff that we used to try to stress them out. Wall sits, planks, just a lot of physical activity,
Okay.
so that it's not hazing. It was actually stuff that, even though it was used as a punishment for whatever they didn't do that they were supposed to do, it was actually just to make them physically more fit and stronger.
Yeah.
So everything that we did in that regard had a purpose that was legitimate.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, we were never, this never our academy that there was any sort of hitting or kicking or anything like that. Unless someone was really acting up and I had my martial arts instructors coming in, I'd say, hey, this is going to be your person that you're going to demonstrate techniques on
Try
today.
this out on Josh over and over and over again. Yeah.
Well, and it's true. I mean, I did that. I would say to the instructor, hey, listen, for today, if you need someone to do demonstrations on, it's going to be this guy.
Gotcha.
And so the instructors knew what I was asking them to do, but at the same time, we never hurt somebody where they couldn't continue on. It was we're sending a little bit of a message.
Yeah, and not that, hazing is definitely not something that I'm in favor of, but yeah, the physical aspects and just from being on the other end of I used to be the guy that was kind of the wuss and would complain about that stuff versus now where I understand the importance of it. It worries me that they're talking about potentially lowering standards for the military and whatnot.
It's bad because enduring controlled physical stress is what prepares you for uncontrolled physical duress out in the real world. And that's one of the things here at 88 Tactical. Trevor talks about it. How do the best way to train for stressful situations is to place yourself in stressful situations. Work out, do things that harden your body a little bit, and then put yourself in situations that make you very uncomfortable. Then, because when you become very uncomfortable and you work through that uncomfortable situation, you develop a skill for doing that. So when you get in a very pressure-filled situation, you understand, okay, yes, this is scary. Yes, my heart rate's going 1,000 miles an hour, but I've been here before and I figured out how to get through it, and therefore I'm going to do it again this time.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great.
Awesome. So let's say you've got someone there, maybe 16, 17, 18 years old, and their life goal is to become a police officer. What would you say are some steps that they could take kind of leading up to eventually, trying to get the job that would make them very prepared and help them succeed in that role?
Right. So to get through the testing process, you simply have to study and be a good student in school, because it's just a general education type of a test that people give. It's non-law enforcement specific. So just study. Make sure that you remain a student, you get good grades, so when it comes down to taking a math and English and composition and reading comprehension test, you know what you're doing. And then stay fit. Get out and do something other than look at your phone. Okay. Playing video games is a great part-time entertainment, but sometimes we live those games. Get out, ride a bike, do the things that I'm sure that you and I did growing up that was just normal, and interact with human beings is the other thing that I would have to say. Interaction in face-to-face encounters, because that's what this job is about, is face-to-face interactions with human beings. And if you don't know how to do that, because all your interactions have been based upon a video screen and how many likes you got or how many you didn't get, you're not prepared for the real world. And so that heavy social interaction is something that's important. And I think that's where the military guys get it, because they live amongst other people doing, accomplishing the same task. And there's so many military guys that look for that in the police department, being part of something.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, just when it comes to jiu-jitsu, a lot of, veterans just like being a part of that brotherhood or that family aspect, and, a group working towards a goal.
It is. I just today started reading a book that my wife recommended. And I don't read a whole lot, but it's a book called Tribe, and I don't remember what it's about. You guys aware of it?
Yeah, we actually recommended it on one of our podcasts.
Well, there you go. That's probably why my wife got it, because she's listening to the podcast that you guys are presenting. But we watched the movie Restrepo together, and they talked about that communal feeling and stuff like that, and it really does make a lot of sense.
Well, and I think the police force too has always been kind of a brotherhood, a fraternity. Did you, when you first came on with your dad being a cop, was it the only family member that was a cop, just your dad, or did you have anyone else?
Nope.
So did you feel like, okay, I've arrived, I'm kind of part of this?
Yes,
this lineage.
And it's funny because he gave me some advice that other competent parents have given their children getting on the police department. He says, "Hey, get in there, study the hardest, work the hardest, and keep your mouth shut." Okay, don't be. My dad, I believe, he was either a lieutenant or a captain at the time that I got hired on there, and what he was saying is, you earn it yourself. Don't base anything that you get based upon a connection to me. And I think that's the best advice people can have is just earn it yourself. Don't think someone else is going to take care of it for you. And you get back to young people these days, parents are so used to taking their kids and being the helicopter parent. And if their kids are uncomfortable, they want to fix discomfort. Well, best thing you can do is let people in your life be uncomfortable and figure out how to get through it themselves, because there are a tremendous amount of uncomfortable situations in life. And if you don't know how to handle that, then you don't exist very well.
So being the son of a cop, a career police officer, were you aware growing up of the kind of inherent dangers of the job? Was that ever Did that ever manifest itself?
Yeah, there was, because I mean, there were stories. You know, my dad, because he came on in '58, he served through a lot of riots.
Okay.
You know, the civil unrest that occurred, and he talked about how, I can remember stories he would tell. He said we'd get done with the normal shift from 4 to midnight, go back to the assembly, then 4 of us would jump in the car, we'd grab a couple Thompson submachine guns, and then they would post us up at a particular intersection that was causing trouble. And he, you know, and he'd say, if you look at the tops of the buildings at this corner, you might see some marks way up at the top where someone let loose because they were throwing, you know, wrist rockets were a very popular thing to shoot at the police back in the day. Same thing at the Memorial Park riots. People were using ball bearings and wrist rockets to target police officers at that time.
Wow.
That would sting.
Oh, yeah.
Kill you if hit in the right spot, I imagine.
No kidding.
So, kind of along in this whole process, you ended up becoming a part of the SWAT team as well.
Correct.
How did that happen for you?
That was a tryout. I mean, it's just something that was very interesting. You know, once I decided to become a police officer, I loved it. I mean, there were times where my partner and I would go in at the end of shift. Do you need us to stay? You don't have to pay us overtime. We didn't want to go home because the adrenaline rush that you got going from call to call to call, solving problems, going to the next one, helping people out, chasing people, car pursuits. It was just very exhilarating and a lot of fun. And because my partner and I were young enough, we didn't realize how dumb we were and how stupid some of the situations we allowed ourselves to get into could have hurt us. That's what, over time, you learn those things. So the next evolution is like, man, I want to become part of the SWAT team. What I thought the SWAT team was and their mission, I just wanted to be part of that. So I tried out for it. Unfortunately, I got selected at a good time because there was a number of people that were leaving. So a number of us got selected. So it was, again, a bunch of greenhorns out there trying to figure things out.
And when was that?
1986.
86. And
so
then
yeah, I hadn't been on the police department for very long.
And how long then were you part of the SWAT team?
Till I retired. So about 22
okay.
years.
Okay. So were you, I mean, you had part of training the new recruits. Did you train any of the SWAT stuff as well, or?
Yeah, the SWAT team, there's a progression. I mean, you know, the new guy just does what he's told and tries not to do anything stupid. And then as you mature and as you go up in rank and you develop seniority, then you are tasked with responsibilities for helping train the team. And when I left, I was the senior sergeant on that team, so that was my responsibility to make sure all the training took place and that the guys had what they needed to accomplish the missions.
Gotcha.
Was there ever a point, I mean, you retired from the police force still fairly young.
Yes.
Was there ever a point where you felt like your body was not cooperating or you felt age creeping in when you're doing the job of a SWAT officer?
No.
Because I know, we both know some people that are kind of realizing their mortality, but they still want to do the cool SWAT stuff, and maybe they're physically.
It's an interesting concept. So with SWAT teams, if you look at like some of the big teams on some of the big departments, the average age is 45 and above.
Oh, whoa. I would have never guessed. I would have thought it would have been way younger than that.
But again, a part of it is because of maturity, right? I'm sure of course, with your fighters, they're young because by the time they're old, they're so beat up they can't barely move. But the young person that has the best physical skills doesn't have the life experience and the repetitions of handling that kind of stuff that the older guys do. So what you find is a lot of times, if you have a team that's nothing but young people, there's a lot of mistakes made. You need those older guys in the team. And when I came on, cooler heads and experience. I mean, experience lends itself. It's just like anything else. You look at, I like to use the analogy in a lot of my classes when it comes to experience of the NFL. They say the game is super fast for the young quarterbacks and it slows down for the older guys. That doesn't happen. What do they mean by that? Well, the older guys have experience. They know what they need to worry about. They know what they can dismiss. And even though their physical skills aren't as good as that young guy that can throw the ball 100 yards, they can manage the game and get things done more efficiently than that young guy can. They're not relying on raw talent to get them through. They're relying on a lot of expertise and experience. And that's the same way with most SWAT teams. It's the young guys that you have to keep control of. But when I got on, the average age was less than 30. And the average, and I was young, I was like 24. 23 or 24. And as my time went on, that average age grew with me to, then we hit the 30-year average. Then we hit the 35-year average. When I left, the average guy was, I think, 40.
Wow.
Right around 40 years old. Now, there was young guys in their 20s, but then there was guys, when I was 45 and left the team, there was a few guys that were older than I was on that team. So,
well, and it makes sense. We use jiu-jitsu as a kind of a, an illustration for a lot of these different things. And, the difference between a white belt and a black belt is, a black belt knows what to ignore and what to pay attention to. And, it's also just all those repetitions.
Yeah.
So as much as I would love to be 21 again and have the same knowledge that I have now, a lot of times the knowledge is enough to where I can hang with the 21-year-olds as long as they're not a freak. So kind of thinking along those lines, you said, you started out at 19, did a bunch of stuff that was probably dangerous and stupid. Going back, if you could change some things, what would you change?
I don't think I would.
No?
To be very honest with you.
Yeah?
Because he enjoyed all that bad stuff too, yeah.
Here's the thing. If you mentioned knowing what you know now, go back to the 21-year-old version of yourself. Well, I enjoyed, if I knew now if I took what I know now back to my 21s, I wouldn't have as much fun as what I did, because there's I would say, oh my goodness, driving down the North Freeway at 141 miles an hour in a Dodge Diplomat that was shaking like a rattle just to see how fast it would go was stupid. Yeah. And we used to do that kind of stuff. We had a snowy day where there was nobody around. So me and my partner found one of the other guys that was patrolling the streets, and we go, try to catch us. And we took off on our car like a pursuit. And then it was so snowy, we ended up bailing out of our car and running behind houses and stuff, just like the people we chased. So if someone would have seen that, it would have been ridiculous.
We're practicing. This is training.
Yeah.
People.
No, it was just flat out young people doing dumb stuff. And so
as long as you survive, it's probably worth it then.
I enjoyed my career. I enjoyed it. I'd like to think I had the proper mindset for what was going on. I mean, there was highs and lows. There were things that would just absolutely frustrate the heck out of me. But at the same time, I really enjoyed what I do. I did. And there's other people that it was merely a job for them, and they couldn't wait for it to get over. I left because I didn't think the benefits would get any better than they would. And then several years later, they came in with the drop program where people can stay an extra 5 years and make more money for it. Had that been there, I would have been there another 5 years easy.
Yeah.
So maybe I left at a good time when I was still young and pretty healthy and able to do stuff.
So then transitioning out did you get right in? Well, 88 probably wouldn't have been around back then. What did you do then after you
retired? I left
the
police academy. That's where I was working. 2 weeks later, I was back there as a civilian in what's a job called training specialist. And I did that for 7 years.
Okay.
So that was a part-time job up to about 30 hours a week. I did some a lot of organizing classes, keeping track of records. I would do some training, and so it was at least 50% administrative stuff, and sometimes 50% getting to actually interact and do some training and various things with the new recruit classes coming in or in-service training. So I got to continue to use some of my skills, and then I started working with. That's about that same year I had my first introduction to 88 Tactical on the concealed carry side of things, but didn't really do much work with them until about 2013. I took one of the survival classes up in Tacoma, and then got rehooked up with the organization and have been working with them ever since.
Okay. And then so what all do you do for 88 out here?
So I'm the training manager, so I schedule all the classes, schedule the instructors. I teach maybe 20% of the time. It's not necessarily my primary job, but I love the teaching side of things. Customer inquiries. I mean, just everything it takes to keep the training side of the business going. Right now, every one of our instructors is a contract instructor, so they're not here on a daily basis. They come in to do classes as needed, and they do their normal jobs on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
I'm getting ready to hire an instructor probably next week, so I have help in this regard.
Gotcha. So when if we're 88 trains civilians, law enforcement, military, coming from the law enforcement side, what would you say to current police officers, military, that might be interested in beefing up their skills kind of on their own dime through 88 or through any of these other programs that exist out there?
It's a valid thing to do. A lot of officers they spend their money on more gear. And they don't. A lot of times, people don't see the value in training. They'll look at a class and they'll say, "Wow, that costs a lot of money." But if you go to a class and you pick up additional insight and additional skills that you can use for the next 20 years, that cost of that training is pretty minimal, as opposed to that piece of gear that you put in a bag that you never ever use because you got 6 of the same things, slightly different. So, and you will see that a lot of officers will seek out training on their own. We're currently running a basic SWAT class in Sioux City right now, and there's an Omaha officer that went to Sioux City to take that class to learn on his own dime. Now, some agencies, well, I'll talk about Omaha. Omaha has a system where the officers do get money every year for equipment and or training that they can spend really just about any way they want. And unfortunately, most of it's spent towards gear as opposed to seeking out the training.
Yeah. Well, there's the whole saying, if you have 4 hours to chop down a tree, you spend the first 3 sharpening the axe.
Yep.
I think so many people miss that aspect, that they want the newest and coolest looking stuff. But if you don't, as a guitar player, there's people out there that want a $3,000 guitar and they can barely play 4 chords. It's like, I understand that on one sense, but for me personally, I'd rather have a $100 guitar and know how to play it really well.
We do and one of the great things about training civilians is they want to be here. If they didn't want to be here, they wouldn't pay their money. And so we've got a number of civilians that we work with that go through our classes that when it comes to firearms handling skills are probably beyond 75% of the officers that I've worked with in my career.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I mean, easily.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of satisfaction in seeing that, because one of the drills that I'll sometimes do with my students here is I'll run them through the state police qualification chute. And we'll get done with it, and I say, all right, that's the police qualification chute. You guys scored 100%. And they go, that was it. Because they've refined their skills enough that it wasn't hard at all for them to be able to accomplish that. And yet every year at the training academy, we were conducting remedial training with some officers because they couldn't make it through that particular chute.
Okay. So when it comes to advancing training, and I'll ask this question both for like the law enforcement and the civilian side, what would you say some of the most important first steps would be? Someone who's never done any outside training.
Well, if you've never done any outside training, first decide if you want to get involved in firearms training. We have we have a limited number of classes that are non-firearms related. But if you're going to get involved in firearms training, just come in and take some basic classes from us. Learn, and you don't even have to have a gun, right? We will rent you a gun so that you can utilize something to see if you like it. And then if you do, you can purchase that. If you don't like it, you try something different. And once you find something that you think you like, stick with it for a while. All right. There's a lot. I'm carrying a gun that's probably 15 years old. All right. I haven't made any upgrades to it, but I shoot it a lot, so I become pretty proficient with it. And that's what I recommend from the firearm side of things. Choose one that works reasonably well for you. Stick with it for a long time. And then if you want to try to find something different, you have the basic skills to understand whether this something new is going to help you or not. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who don't take any training and they chase better shooting skills by simply buying different guns because they think it's the gun's fault. Right?
Yeah. So that would be you'd say
that'd be your starter, and then after you become proficient with that tool, then subject yourself to classes that require role playing. We have some of those where there's human interaction. Like, we set up scenario-based training where, all right, you're a concealed carry permit holder. This is a make-believe quick shop. We want you to go in and buy a Slurpee and then react to whatever happens while you're there. Okay, because many people think because they shoot a hole in a piece of paper really well that they'll be able to translate that into self-defense.
Exactly,
It's not the same.
Exactly.
Right. You can punch a bag forever. That doesn't mean you're going to be able to punch somebody in the face that's trying to move.
Yeah. Well, you got something?
Yeah. So that's your role here, but ADA has the Takema facility.
Correct.
Which is, I know that's where you would much rather spend most of your time.
I enjoyed it there.
Were you into the outdoor survival stuff before you took the classes at ADA, or I know you said earlier on that you like camped and all that stuff, and
but I mean, as a as a kid, my dad would take us on canoe trips, go up to like South Dakota and paddle the Missouri River down to Niobrara, Nebraska. Spent time that way when some of my friends on the police department introduced me to canoeing up in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota, which I really liked. And then, but the winter side of survival, or not even survival, winter camping, I didn't get introduced to until I took a class here with our main instructor, Terry Barney, and got introduced to winter camping, and then just love it because, I mean, in the summertime in camping in Nebraska, unless you've got an air conditioner, you're just sitting in a sleeping bag sweating. Out there in the wintertime, you build a fire to keep warm. And once you figure out how to do that, it's a lot of fun. And then just learning the more primitive skills, going back to what people used to have to do to survive. That was just
the hunter-gatherer days.
Well, it was just normal. It wasn't survival. It wasn't survival training to them.
Yeah.
It's just what you had to do. All right, you got to build a fire. And one thing that struck me, we had a group of young men hire us, and they were chiropractors. So late 20s, early 30s to do an event up there, and we did a little stuff in the woods. And there was only like 1 out of the 6 or 7 of them that had actually ever built a fire on their own. And so, in that experience, that was quite an accomplishment for them. They felt really great about what they were able to do that day. And we find that in a lot of people. You go out, here's a book of matches, and here's a knife and a saw, and then you figure out how to do it. And the sense of accomplishment you see in people is actually, it's pretty cool, because then they start to like it, and then they start to come back. They want more, and there's a little bit of an independent feeling there when someone learns how to do those really basic skills that have been lost over the course of time, because you've got, I call them the manly skills that you should know.
Right.
We have a certain part of our culture that frowns upon that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Why should I learn how to build a fire when I can just press a button on my wall and my fireplace lights up?
Well, that's one of the reasons why we start doing this podcast, is to let people like ourselves and like you have a voice and a mouthpiece to try and not let those skills diminish.
Sure.
I just spoke with a guy last night who's he is basically a huge cyber terrorism expert. And he was talking to me about how easy with this whole EMP thing it would be to just cripple a city or cripple a country, even the banking system in particular, and how quickly things like learning how to filter water, or learning how, even with all this technology, that it could just be rendered useless in a few minutes.
Well,
I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist, but listening to a very intelligent man who's in the banking industry and is a cyber terrorism expert tell me, like, so yeah, if you know how to filter water, and if you know how to, and I'm thinking, all right, this isn't some crazy millennial bug kind of guy. This is a guy that wears a suit and tie all day long, and they're worried about this type of stuff, where we could get kind of sent back to the dark ages very, very quickly.
Oh, yeah. And so there's a number of people, the preppers out there, so to speak. Everybody's heard of the phrase "go bag," my 72-hour bag. And there is so much of the population who thinks they're going to throw on a pack that they can carry. They're going to head off into the woods with a pack and a gun, and they're going to be able to survive. And the Terry Barney, our instructor here for the survival stuff, he starts right off. He says, I have trained all over the world, and it would be extremely difficult for me to do it if there wasn't other people in the woods with me. If there are people in the woods with me, it will be even impossible, because everybody's going to scare away any possibility of food, or they're going to shoot it all and it's going to rot on the ground. So he says the best thing you can do is learn how to survive in your own house. But there's all those people that spend hours and hours and days and weeks researching the equipment that they're going to be able to utilize to stay alive in the woods, and yet they've never been to the woods that they're going to stay alive in. It's just, if you think that's just like, that's just the way this world is. And I've learned that, going out and going through some pretty nasty weather weekends and stuff like that. The reality of it is yes, he's absolutely right. Prepare your home for things to come.
What would you suggest to prepare your home then? Any suggestions for that?
Well, it's just the kind of the general rule of thought is, can you get home? Like if it happened right now and my car won't start, how am I going to get home? And then what do I have at my house to be able to reasonably take care of problems for a while? Do I have a year's worth of food in my house? Absolutely not. Okay, I don't have that. I've got, a certain amount of supplies. You also have to rely on friends, okay? Because you can't stay awake for 24 hours with your gun on your front porch like some people think they're going to just fend everybody off and stack bodies in the yard. That's not going to happen. If you have a whole lot of food and people know it and you're by yourself, they're going to come take it from you. So don't advertise that kind of stuff, but just have a realistic expectation. Go out in the woods and try to survive for a weekend with your pocket knife and your everyday carry stuff that everyone thinks that they, I carry certain things every day, but I don't believe that I can right now get dropped off in the middle of nowhere and survive until next winter. Right? My level of skill is not that well refined. And I've had some training. Most people don't have any training, and they just believe that they can do it, having never tested themselves.
Yeah. Well, it makes me really happy that I actually went through Boy Scouts. I never became an Eagle Scout, but just thinking that there's people out there that don't know. And I tell you what, like a couple years ago, I got a bunch. We're realtors. My wife and I are realtors, and we had some people that moved into a house that had all this firewood in the back that they didn't want, just big logs. And so we hauled it away, and I threw it in my backyard, and I'm like, I went out and bought a wood splitting axe, and I started splitting this wood, and it just was so primal. I've read that splitting wood actually is one of the exercises that will immediately raise your testosterone, and I feel like that was absolutely the case. And then, using that wood to build a fire, which I hadn't done forever, and then, kind of taking it a step further, like building a fire in the summer is one thing, but when you build a fire to actually keep warm from it or to actually cook over it, like it just does something. It's very primal. It does something.
Build one in the rain.
Oh yeah, I've done. Yeah, well, we did that in Boy Scouts, and I know a nice little trick for doing that.
God, I remember getting yelled at as a kid, my parents, if I let the fire go down too low in the house.
Yeah.
Like I was the eldest. It was my job to make sure that the fire kept burning, because back then in Ireland, and it's not like I'm ancient.
Yeah.
But we were heating our homes with a fireplace.
Yeah.
Well, one of the first things I would do if my wife and I, because my wife loves the outdoors. She's been out winter camp. We've been in January in Colorado at 10,000 feet camping before. So she's perfect for me.
Yeah.
But if we go to like a state campground to spend the night, I won't go buy any firewood, even though it's required. The first thing I'll do is set up my shelter and then go to all the open campsites and find all the firewood that people left behind, because they get those bundles. They don't split it down. They throw a match on it thinking it's going to burn. That tells you what the state of people's knowledge about fire making is. All right, I'm going to throw this little fire starter on here, and I'm going to have these big 5-inch round or 10-inch round logs, and they're going to make a fire.
Hey, that's part of outdoor skills, is scavenging.
Scavenging? Oh, absolutely.
Well, and you talked about winter camping. Like, I don't remember. We used to do that all the time in the Boy Scouts, and I remember the first one. I had gotten this sleeping bag from my grandma for Christmas. It was a tiger sleeping bag, and we just thought it was so warm. And so I took that on our first winter Camp Scout thing, and so did two of the other scouts. And we were so cold that night. We don't talk about this. This is probably the first time I've talked about it, but we ended up like all sleeping together, like curled up together because we were so cold. And that's when you realize, there's a temperature rating on these sleeping bags. And mine was rated for 60 degrees, and we were sleeping out at,
your Tony the Tiger sleeping bag wasn't cutting it.
Exactly.
Well, a little survival tip when you go winter camping: take an empty Gatorade bottle with you.
Yeah.
Slide it into your sleeping bag. That way, when the time comes, you don't have to get out of your sleeping bag to take care of business. Now, it's a little unnerving the first time, but then once you figure it all out and you don't have to get your ass frozen in order to take care of business, you'll always have that with you.
Yeah, he doesn't mean use it as a pillow. Yeah. For the viewers out there, they're like, what good is a Gatorade bottle?
Yeah. I've tried to convince my wife to let me do that at home because, when you're training a lot, drinking a lot of water, it's like you're getting up 3 times every night. I'm like, just let me keep a milk jug by the bed. And she's like, no, you can't.
Yeah, no, we're way more civilized than that, Josh. Yeah. Even the dogs go outside. They make an effort.
If you got plumbing, you got to get up and go.
Yeah. Yeah, there was another time we went, and it was so cold that, like, I've had contact lenses since I was in 6th grade, and I woke up the next morning and my contacts had frozen inside of their case. So, but I tell you what, man, I think there was maybe one winter camping experience that I had that was just like good the whole time. Everything else, I learned some important lessons, and starting the fire in the rain, and you're making me realize that those were skills I learned back in junior high, and I haven't really reactivated those.
I know.
Since.
I was just thinking the same thing too. Like I'm thinking, man, I would probably let a fire go out in my house right now if I had to keep one going overnight. And
well, that's one of the cool thing about the skills that we teach is Terry does such a good job with it. It's basically teaching you how to be out in the winter and be comfortable. Now you have to do a little work to maintain your fire and stuff like that, but that I've camped as low as 6 degrees below zero up in our facility up there and remained comfortable. It's just simply from the different types of skills and strategies that I've learned through that process. So I'm a student of survival stuff. I'm not an instructor of it, but it's a lot of fun. I look forward to it every year.
Awesome. So then what would you say kind of the future has for you? Do you just plan on being here? Is there any other big pursuits on the horizon?
I don't have any big career pursuits that I'm doing. I enjoy working here. I work with friends. This business started with a bunch of guys that knew each other, and my wife and I. My wife was a retired police officer, and we're looking for things to do to give back. We've started up. I'm going to give a shameless plug to this organization called Project Sanctuary.
Okay.
And what they do is they have recreational retreats for military families who are struggling because of what the military assignments have done to those families. So PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, finances, alcoholism, all that kind of stuff. So what they do is they sponsor these retreats where these families get to go to a place for 6 weeks. Everything's paid for. They have a couple hours worth of educational things a day, and then they do fun stuff. Wintertime out in the Colorado Rockies, there's snow tubing, there's ice skating, there's snowshoeing, there's snowmobiling. They rent out a gym facility so the kids can swim, do gymnastics, and do all sorts of stuff. And what helps support that is volunteers. So I go out, cook and clean, and just be there kind of as peer support for people. So they have a week of doing nothing but worrying about having fun as a family. So that's one thing that we found. We've been to 4 of those retreats so far in the past year. We're going to another one coming up in June, and I found a lot of satisfaction in doing that because we're giving back. I was never in the military, so this is my way of trying to contribute and pay respect to those people because I've seen stress and the effects of stress in law enforcement, but it's nothing like what those poor kids have had to endure going over to the desert for the past 20 years or however long it's been. So
that's cool. Yeah, we're. I've mentioned this group before, but we're doing a show this weekend for Miles for Heroes, which does something similar. They arrange like hunting and fishing trips for veterans, and then there's another one called Heroes Hunting that we've done some stuff with in the past. But yeah, those are great organizations. How if someone was interested in supporting that group, would you say Project Sanctuary?
ProjectSanctuary.com. The reason I like it is it's supporting the whole family at once.
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong with any of there's a lot of organizations that people can be involved with. One of our customers actually a couple of years ago gave us a flyer for a charity golf tournament down at the base, and the benefactor of that charity golf tournament was Project Sanctuary. So my wife looked it up and to see what it was, saw that there were volunteer opportunities. I mean, the 3 of the 4 retreats we've been to have been in Winter Park, Colorado. Okay. And the other one was Grand Lake, Colorado, right along the Colorado River. So, I mean, it's beautiful scenery, and you go out, you get to interact with families, become part of the tribe, so to speak, part of that and giving back. And you feel the sense of purpose that guy talked about in that book that you guys have recommended. So,
you just touched on something. People tend to think of PTSD as purely a military a symptom of being in the military. But, we've had a recent guest on our podcast who was a firefighter who was diagnosed with PTSD. We know law enforcement guys. What do you see kind of long term as the fix, or is there a fix for that? I mean, I know like being physically fit and all of that stuff helps, but is it that tribe? Is it that community and not losing touch with it? Because the book that you're reading right now kind of talks pretty heavily about that it's that loss of tribe. Right. That's when the coping mechanism kind of gets pulled from you.
So I spoke to one of the people that I spoke to at the retreat. He came through as a family, and then now he works for Project Sanctuary. And he has an extensive military career, and without getting too much into his exact story, he basically said, Kurt, war is a very immoral business. All right. What we're doing is we're sending people over there to do things for us that are tragic on the other end. There's no clean way to conduct a war. And back in the World War I and World War II era, I think everybody understood that. All right. We understood that there were going to be a lot of civilian casualties that occurred, and that was accepted, and we welcomed those guys back as heroes. Well, as time went on, more and more things happened, and that wasn't accepted. There's a certain segment of our population that thinks we should drop a bomb and it should only kill the bad guys, and that's not realistic. And that handcuffs those guys, if that were the case, to such a degree that then they're in a hopeless situation. And that's what helped. I mean, those are some of the things that contributed to that. And the way it was described to me by this gentleman, he says, it's like alcoholism, all right? It's always going to be there, but you can gain control over it by doing certain things and talking and having that help that you need. Was part of what it was for him. And then giving back and helping more people that were struggling with the same thing was also therapeutic for him as well. So, I mean, like I said, I tell people in those briefings, I say, my wife and I, we've had a career in law enforcement. We've had a taste of things that have caused us some problems, but we made it through pretty doggone healthy. So we want to be there to help those people that need that need the help with it. If we can, if it means for 2 hours we watch their kids and they can let their guard down, that's what we'll do for them.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Well, and I think it's great that families are included too, because the brunt of the impact obviously falls on the person who's kind of dealing with these issues, but the family's there and they have to deal with it, and there's a lot of stress on those folks as well.
Oh, it is. It's a very eye-opening experience, and part of what we do as volunteers is while the adults are doing 2 hours a day with counselors, we're helping kids out, and they'll have a youth counselor there, and we just play games and do little activities to try to draw things out. And even the littlest guys are affected by the deployments that their parents have gone on.
Yeah.
So you see it in the way they act and the way they handle things. And so anybody that thinks it's just the soldier that's involved or in suffering, it's the whole doggone family that pays that price.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I will put a link to that in the show notes, projectsanctuary.com.
It's a Colorado-based thing. And I would encourage anybody. I mean, it's well worth anybody's while to go out and take care to help volunteer or contribute some funds. It's not cheap to run a retreat.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we're coming up on an hour, so we don't want to keep you too much longer. Any kind of final words, final thoughts? I had one kind of strange little question, and it's in my head just because recently, as a guitar player, we were talking about shooting before, and you have a gun that you've been using for 15 years. And, I've had guitars come through my life where it's like, it's a guitar. And then for whatever reason, it happened this weekend. I picked up a guitar, and it was like just electricity through my body. I couldn't stop thinking about it. When you're talking about someone, picking out a firearm, because all the guns I own have been gifts. Mm-hmm. I've never actually gone out and bought my own. Now that I think about it, do you find kind of that connection with the firearm at all? Either of you guys? Is that?
I don't have an emotional. To me, they're all tools, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of toys too, but they're mostly tools that I want to make sure work correctly. But I mean, I could see why you can get an emotional attachment to a guitar because it produces art. It produces, I don't know.
It's a different part of your brain you're using.
A service weapon, I suppose.
It is.
Was that your service weapon?
No, it actually, duty weapon the duty weapons that I've carried are a little bit bigger than what I like to carry now that I'm retired. It's a similar. I mean, I carried a Glock on duty. I'm carrying a Glock right now. I've got my revolver that I came on the police department with. I get it out and shoot it every once in a while just for nostalgic purposes. Mm-hmm. And so, and I've got a number of guns that my dad has passed down to me. That I have more connection because of the tie to my dad than I do to just the firearm. Again, it's a tool to me. Some of the firearms I like the best are ones that are not self-defense related. I got a little .22 rifle that I put a suppressor on, and it's a blast to shoot. I have fun. I get to just have fun with it. back like when I was a kid shooting a BB gun at toads along the Elkhorn River.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, strange question, but that was just kind of running through my mind.
Again, there's different things with everybody. You see people walk in here and their eyes light up the way they have a connection to the actual tool itself, where I have more of a connection to the training and teaching people. I enjoy training people. It's in part it's performing. So it's my way of performing, but I'm really relaying a message, so I enjoy that.
Gotcha. Yeah, and for me, guitar really is a tool as well. But it seems like I've had lots and lots of guitars, and the ones that always cycle out are the ones that don't really, I never really make a connection with, even though they do the same exact thing. So, thanks for entertaining me on that. So, yeah, we'll go ahead and just start to wrap up then. Kurt, really appreciate you coming on. Lots of wisdom. And so, I think there's a lot that people can take away from what you've talked about if staying fit and, the charities and the training. And so, yeah, I just appreciate you filling us in.
Appreciate, talking about parting thoughts is for those people that have never taken a class, right? Consider, obviously it's a plug for our business, but even if it's not our business, because we see a lot of people that come in and shoot a lot, they'll spend a lot of money, shooting poorly. And it costs $22 an hour to rent a lane here. For $85, you can take a 4-hour class with an instructor to give you pointers that can make you much better in that short amount of time, which means every dollar you spend from that day forward on firearms or related training is money better spent. It's just like golf lessons. You can go out and you can hack away all you want at a golf club if that's what you want to do, but you take 1 hour lesson with the guy that can show you something, and the improvement you see is astronomical compared to trying to learn stuff by yourself.
Yeah. Well, and back to Warren Buffett again, one of his big things is invest in yourself. And he's obviously one of the world's best investors in financial and business assets, but he said probably the best investment he ever made was in a Dale Carnegie public speaking course. And that's just because, it kind of helps, it amplified him. It helped him, do what he was doing better. Yeah. And so I think any type of training for anything is really going to do that.
Public speaking is a great way to help overcome stress because nobody likes to speak in public generally, But if you learn how to do that, when I first started teaching, I hated speaking in front of people. And then I've learned to love speaking in front of people because I've learned the material, I've gained confidence in that, I've actually made connections with people that way. And so that's one of the things I'll tell people, hey, do hard things, accomplish hard things. And if you don't like speaking in public, go to church, volunteer to do some readings because you're going to get nervous. You're going to get dry mouth. You're going to be shaking. And then you're going to work through it and teach yourself that you can do those things. So that's
coping. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think those are good words to end on.
Stuff. Yeah, it was great.
So I will be right back with the book of the week. But Kurt, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks a million.
Thanks, Mick.